Hello, fantastic fifth graders. I am so excited that I get to keep reading the Wednesday Wars aloud to you guys. All thanks to the permission from Scholastic Books. They're being awesome and they're telling teachers, you know what, keep doing it. Kids need it, they love it, and I know I love it. So I'm really thankful that I get to keep reading the Wednesday Wars by Gary D. Schmidt aloud to you guys today, and until we finish the book, which is going to be pretty soon. So last week when we read, we left off on a pretty big cliffhanger. Holling had just learned from his sister, who we found out her name is Heather. We learned that she was stuck in Minneapolis with no money, no boyfriend Chit, no yellow V-dub bug, and no way to get home. And so she was calling Holling and saying, "Can you help?" And of course, Holling, being the loving, unbeknownst to him, loving brother that he is, ran to the Western Union Bank and cashed in his savings bond and wired the money, which means he sent it to her like a bank transfer. He sent the money to Heather, but he wasn't sure if he sent it to the right bank by the bus station in Minneapolis. But he gets a call the next day from Heather saying that she's going to be in New York at 10:50 and she needs a ride home, obviously. Holling, excited, tells his dad and mom, and dad says, "I don't care," basically, and she can figure her own stuff out. And Holling is upset. And dad tells Holling, well, he can drive himself in. Holling tries, realizes it's probably not the best choice, goes back inside just in time to get a phone call from Merrill Lee. And Merrill Lee is asking if he would like to go to New York City today with her and her father. And obviously Holling says, yes, but I need to go to the bus station to pick up my sister. And that is where we left off. So let's see what happens. All right. We are joining Holling in the kitchen with his mother. I went into the kitchen and I said, "I need money for 2 train tickets." "Train tickets?" my mother said. "And money for 2 lunches." She stared at me. "Big lunches," I said. She went upstairs for her pocketbook. I was there when the bus from Chicago pulled in at 10:50. The Port Authority was all noise and rushing. The accumulated combustion from the buses had thickened the air. The whoosh and squeak and hollering of the brakes and the distorted announcements over the PA system and the newsboys hawking and the pell-mell of more bodies than belong in any one building gave the place a general roar. As for the floor, you couldn't have found a greater confusion if the ceiling had been lifted off and the sky had rained down ticket stubs and newspapers and baby Ruth wrappers. But as soon as the 10:50 bus from Chicago parked itself, everything stopped. The rush, the roar, the squeak, the whoosh, they all stopped. Really, like Leonid Brezhnev had sent over an atomic bomb and wiped it all out. They did not start up again until my sister got off the bus, and she ran out of that diesel combustion and right to me, and we held each other, and we were not empty at all. "Holling," she said, "I was so afraid I wouldn't be able to find you." "I was standing right here, Heather," I said. "I'll always be standing right here." For lunch, we had grilled cheese sandwiches and Cokes and chocolate donuts at a counter in the Port Authority. Outside, we bought pretzels from a stand, and then we walked to Central Park, hand in hand. We lay down in the sheep meadow, and my sister told me about driving west with the sun on your face. We got up and walked around the pond and stopped at an outcropping of boulders that fell out of the woods. Around us was every shade of green you could ever hope to imagine, broken up here and there with a flowering tree blushing a light pink. All the colors were garbled and reflected in the tiny ripples of the water. Then, through the wandering paths of the ramble, looking as if we were up in the mountains of California, and then across Bethesda Terrace, it's a hard word, where we sat on the stone walls and traced the carvings with our fingers until someone hollered at us to get off there. Then back along the mall underneath tall elms until we passed the statue of, no kidding, William Shakespeare, who stared down at us sternly, probably because he was wearing tights and is embarrassed to be doing that in front of everybody. We walked slowly. We talked a little. I told her about our atomic bomb drills and about our town and about the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. She told me about Minneapolis and how she got out of the yellow bug and wouldn't get back in, and how Chit just drove away, and about going to the Western Union and finding the money for the ticket and falling asleep for the first time in 2 days on the bus to Chicago. But mostly we didn't talk. It was spring in Central Park, and being there with my sister was enough. We took the train out of the city and walked from the station. When we got back home, it didn't matter that my mother had made us burned grilled cheese sandwiches for supper. It was just so good that the house wasn't empty anymore. My father said only one thing during supper. "Did you find yourself?" "What?" my sister said. "Did you find yourself?" he asked again. "She found me," I said. By the end of the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, Laertes is stabbed, the queen is poisoned, and the king is poisoned and stabbed, which is pretty much the same thing that happens in Hamlet, or happens to Hamlet. By the time it's all over, there are these dead bodies all over the stage, and even though Horatio is hoping that flights of angels are coming to sing Hamlet to his rest, it's hard to believe that there's any rest for him. Maybe he knew that, though. Maybe that's why he dressed in black all the time. Maybe it's why he was never happy. Maybe he looked in all the wrong places trying to find himself. Or maybe he never had someone to tell him that he didn't need to find himself. He just needed to let himself be found. That's what I think Shakespeare was trying to say about what it means to be a human being in the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. And speaking of being found, that's what happened to Lieutenant Baker, too. Really? After almost 3 months in the jungles of Vietnam, he was found. I was there on the last Wednesday afternoon of May, a cool blue day, when Mrs. Sidman came in with an envelope and handed it to Mrs. Baker. She took it with hands that were trembling. She tore the top slowly open and then stood there holding the telegram, unable to pull it out and read it. "Can I help?" said Mrs. Sidman. Mrs. Baker just nodded. "And then I'll take Holling to my office so that you can be alone," she said. Mrs. Baker turned and looked at me, and I knew she wasn't going to send me to Mrs. Sidman's office so that she could be alone. You don't send someone away who has lit a candle with you. "I suppose not," said Mrs. Baker. Mrs. Sidman took the envelope, then held out the open telegram to Mrs. Baker. But Mrs. Baker closed her eyes. "Read it," she whispered. Mrs. Sidman looked at me, then looked down at the telegram. Then she read the first line. "Sweet eyes, stop." Think of the sound you make when you let go after holding your breath for a very, very, very long time. Think of the gladdest sounds you know. The sound of dawn on the first day of spring break, the sound of a bottle of Coke opening, the sound of a crowd cheering in your ears because you're coming down to the last part of a race and you're ahead. Think of the sound of water over stones in a cold stream and the sound of wind through green trees on a late May afternoon in Central Park. Think of the sound of a bus coming into the station carrying someone you love. Then put all of those together, and they would be nothing compared to the sound that Mrs. Baker made that day from somewhere deep inside that had almost given up when she heard the first line of that telegram. Then she started to hiccup and to cry and to laugh, and Mrs. Sidman put the telegram down, held Mrs. Baker in her arms, nodded to me, and took her out of the classroom for a drink of water. And I know I shouldn't have, but I picked up that telegram and I read the rest. Here is what it said. "Sweet eyes, stop. Out of the jungle, stop. Okay, stop. Home in time for strawberries, stop. Love, tie, stop." Shakespeare couldn't have written it any better than that. And that's where we're going to stop for today. That's the end of May. We are now into June, the last month of the Wednesday Wars. This was a big chapter. Heather, Holling's sister, came home. Mrs. Baker's husband is coming home. He's alive. He's been found. Super exciting. So we only have 1 month left. And if I remember right, let's see here. We're on page 237 and we have 264 pages left. So we have less than 30 pages left. I'll probably post another video by the end of the week. In the meantime, let me know your predictions. You can write them to me on the Google Doc in our classroom. You can post them on our class stream on the front of Google Classroom. You can send me an email. You can write me a message on Class Dojo. It is up to you guys, but I'd love to hear from you guys. I miss you all so much, but I'm really happy that we get to at least continue this and finish this book together. All right, stay tuned for the last month of the Wednesday Wars.